So my name is Vincent Riccio. I'm a Senior Technical Marketing Manager on the automation side of the Cloud Management Business Unit. And so today I'm going to go over basically our automation solution and how we can incorporate and consume that self-service hybrid cloud investment with our vRealize automation tool. So this is going to be part 3, basically self-service hybrid cloud. And what I'm going to go over, let me just kind of do a little bit of a recap. So we've looked at the capacity needs of the environment. We've done the what-if analysis. We've looked at, some of the networking considerations of migrating to the cloud, or migrating to the VMware Cloud and AWS. So what I'm going to be talking about is how do you set it up? How do you kind of set up your constructs of your cloud in order to make that a deployment target for your applications and services? So let's say that you want to declare an application, you want to declare what a server might look like from an IAC perspective, do some automation around deploying to that environment, and then maybe even present a self-service catalog to your internal users who may want to request applications and services. And then day 2 actions on those deployments. And then we'll look at some of the integration with vRealize Operations Manager from a cost visibility and monitoring standpoint. Okay, so let me just jump into the demo here. And we'll take a look at this. So I'm going to be actually inside of vRealize Automation. I think I did the wrong screen here. Let's get that to Firefox. Center full screen. Okay. And so basically, right here I'm in vRealize Automation, and vRealize Automation is a cloud agnostic automation tool, automation orchestration, self-service. And one of the main kind of ways that we talk about vRealize Automation when it comes to hybrid cloud, when we mean we're extending the data center, like you have VCF on-prem perhaps, and VMware Cloud on AWS, right, is you're still consuming that SDDC. So one way that we talk about it is we can consume that SDDC and continue to build on that SDDC and manage that SDDC too from an automation perspective. Like maybe you want to run some scripts to, deploy another SDDC or add host to an SDDC. So there's things that we can do from the perspective, not just of deploying a machine to that environment and consuming what you purchased, but also having the ability to do some automation in that environment as well. So I'm going to run through how we kind of set it up. And I've done a lot of the pre-work for you because it would take too long for me to go in and build it all. So I've just kind of done it already, and I'll just show you kind of how we got there. So what we do with vRealize Automation is we carve out clusters, hosts, AWS. If it's in AWS, we carve out availability zones. If it's native vSphere, we carve out clusters and hosts and resource pools. With VMware Cloud and AWS, since it is a vSphere environment, we're essentially carving out clusters and hosts that you may want to use for consumption, right, for deployments. So let me click on my VMware Cloud and AWS cloud zone. So each one of these are cloud zones. So you see a cloud zone for AWS, you see a cloud zone for Azure. And what we can do is we can tag these cloud zones. Now, when the nice thing about tagging these cloud zones is that allows me to do placement decisions. It allows me, when I create my infrastructure as code, to say, hey, if someone chooses production or someone chooses development or someone chooses prod, et cetera, or maybe they choose VMC, VMware Cloud and AWS, from a dropdown, then that tag will basically allow us to do the right placement. And you'll see tags throughout the system. And this allows us to have constraints and inputs, or just to say these are capabilities of these particular environments, right? So here in my VMware Cloud and AWS environment, I have a cluster and I've tagged that env VMC. So what that's going to do is allow me to say, okay, that cluster, anytime a machine is going to particularly use that tag for constraints, we're going to go to this cluster, okay? And so that's what a cloud zone is, carving out resources. So for instance, if I look at my AWS cloud zone, we're carving out accounts or regions and availability zones in US West 1, or it could be US East 1 or whatever. So that's what a cloud zone is, okay? Now, the way that we do our cloud agnostic provisioning from vRealize Automation is through abstractions. And those abstractions start with these things over here that I'll show you, mappings and profiles. So for instance, like a flavor mapping is kind of t-shirt sizes, right? So if I go into medium, for instance, I could say anytime a machine goes to VMware Cloud on AWS and they choose a medium flavor or size, then I want this to be the size of the machine. If it goes to AWS, then I want it to be maybe a T2 small, or maybe in this case, it should have been a T2 medium. But basically what I can then do is abstract that. I can abstract images as well. So let's say that I want to deploy an Ubuntu 18 image to VMware Cloud and AWS. Then it will know what image to use within that environment based on the constraints that it's going into that environment. So I don't ever have to tell it, use a specific image when I'm doing my deployments, or I'm presenting catalog items to users. I don't need to necessarily tell them that, hey, you can, that you will want to use this particular image, right? So again, another abstraction of these environments. Now, what's interesting with the VMware Cloud and AWS piece is how we abstract or consume, and abstract the network profiles and the storage profiles. Because when you look at VMware Cloud and AWS specifically, right, you're looking at NSX and vSAN as sort of the networking and storage capabilities within that solution. So what we do is we consume those. So we bring those in. So from like the networking perspective, we'll bring in your networks that exist inside that environment. So your NSX networks, your vSphere networks will show up. You'll be able to tag those and then consume them and apply policies toward them. So you might say, we may only want certain types of workloads to get onto this network, right? And then we could choose security groups within NSX. So I can basically say, maybe there's a security group that VMs that consume this network profile, I want to put those into a security group. And you could do this on AWS as well, or, and NSX. So these are obviously going to be like firewall rules and policies around security that will be associated with this. So if this is like a front end web servers using this particular network profile, then obviously we may not want to open up anything but HTTP and HTTPS, things like that, right? So having those kind of security policies available is really nice. Now, from a storage profile perspective too, we start to consume those storage policies that exist within vSAN and within your vCenter. So the vSAN will have constructs will have what we call storage policies associated with them. And you can create your own within vSAN, or you can basically consume the out of the box. So that could be, how many copies of a machine do we want to make? Or what does our IOPS limits look like, and things like that. So we can consume those policies. So it makes it real easy to say, okay, we've made this investment in hybrid cloud. Now we're going to deploy to it, consume it, and all that stuff is already presented and available for us to go ahead and start using. Okay, so those were kind of our mappings and then our cloud zone. The other thing that we do as well is we can do pricing cards within this tool. So the pricing card allows me to do things like get cost visibility up front. So when a user goes in to request items from the catalog, they'll have an upfront cost associated with it. That upfront cost estimate could actually be a criteria for like an approval policy, for instance. But our pricing card requires the vRealize Operations Manager integration. And basically what we can do is we can set rates and then also say, hey, if I tag things ENV VMC, maybe I want to add additional charges from a deployment standpoint. So if someone goes in there and deploys something to AWS or based on some tag, then we're going to add an additional cost associated with that. Okay. So that's kind of what these pricing cards do. And we'll kind of see how this interacts with the system as I go through everything here. Now let's go back to our... Oh,
a couple of quick questions, though.
Sure.
From a practical standpoint, really. So for example, someone has a VMC environment. They're already sitting in the cloud. They subscribe to Cloud Assembly because they like all this automation quite a lot. So on premises, you will have to deploy a few machines, appliances, and set it all up. This is a SaaS-based service, right? So where does that infrastructure sit? If someone takes that subscription, does it sit somewhere else and you're just subscribing to the service, or does it take up space on your VMC environment?
No, actually, so yeah, good question. So there's a couple of ways that we can ultimately consume this product. vRealize Automation does have an on-prem solution. That's actually what I'm in now. There's also a cloud-based solution, same code base, same features. Like Tarun said, there may be some features in the cloud that are a little quicker in terms of the release. We actually do a monthly release cycle for the cloud, and then a quarterly in VRA for the on-prem. But basically, if you're consuming cloud, it's all API. If you're in the cloud, if you're using vRealize Automation Cloud, which is the SaaS version, then everything's API except your vSphere and then your VMC. The only thing you need inside of VMC and inside of your vSphere environments is what we call a cloud proxy. And that proxy allows you, it's just a virtual appliance, and that allows you to communicate with those vCenters. From an AWS and Azure and Google perspective, it's all API driven. So there's nothing you need from an infrastructure standpoint to do a public cloud deployment or integration. You don't need to deploy anything. The only thing you need in a VMware Cloud environment is just the cloud proxy if you are using the SaaS version. If you have the vRealize Automation on-prem version, then you do not need the cloud proxy. It has its own proxy and will communicate with these vCenters natively.
Right. Good.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Absolutely. So there's no, so for example, if someone has just the VMC environment, they still are not consuming any infrastructure resources, what I was getting at. So yeah.
Correct. You don't have to. Yeah. I mean, you could deploy, we do support deploying vRealize Automation into VMC if you wanted to do that. A lot of customers I work with, they actually have vRealize Automation installed on their on-prem environment, and then they just connect to their VMware Cloud on AWS through the connector. Basically, there's a section in here called Cloud Accounts. When you click on Cloud Accounts, you just tell it, just give it information about your VMware Cloud environment, and it connects up automatically.
Right. So if we have then these connected, say, so this is another question basically, that if once you have these cloud accounts connected, endpoints connected, and all configured, what are the different blueprints that come, say, out of the box? Or what are the kind of things that people will have to do to make it more functional, if you like?
Yeah, good question. So right now we are currently working on having a little more curated content in here. We actually have a content team working on that right now. But currently, we don't have an out-of-the-box blueprint for each cloud. Basically, those would, we do have kind of a startup guide and some quick starts in here that will create a small blueprint for you. Like for VMware Cloud and AWS and VMware Cloud Foundation, we actually have that that goes through like this little wizard, and then it creates a blueprint. But ultimately, what I see most customers doing is building their blueprints based on how they want to do it. And our blueprint designer is really easy to use. And then you can source control those in Git. So a lot of times we see a lot of customers using source control, whether it's Bitbucket or Git, to actually develop those blueprints, and then it syncs back to vRealize Automation. And so that gives them a little bit more of a source of truth, and then a little more of a DevOps sort of methodology.
So at the beginning of the presentation, you talked about infrastructure as code. You finally just touched on it right there with using version control from one perspective. There's a story that's missing there. Are you guys really pitching this as infrastructure as code, or are you literally pitching it as what you see? Does that make sense where I'm going with this? And we can take it offline, but I think there's a misconception that's going to happen really quick for a lot of folks.
Well, yeah. So there's one thing, the way that we are addressing infrastructure as code essentially is saying that you can declare the infrastructure and the templates in YAML, right? So it's a declarative model, and then we can iterate on top of it by modifying the code, right? Okay. So basically, if you look in the designer, I have in here the capability to do constraints, namespace tagging, dependencies, run additional scripts and things like that. So in here right now, what we're doing is it's more of an IaaS model. But what we are saying is you can declare it, you can specify what you want the infrastructure to look like, and then iteratively update upon it. Okay. Now with our recent acquisition of SaltSec, and I don't want to go down here too much, is we will be integrating a little bit more of that in here. And the current phase is coming up. And then we will start to really be able to round out the whole story of infrastructure as code. Okay. Right. So you're right. There is a missing piece. We've known about the missing piece, which is why we made the acquisition. So
no, that makes perfect sense. Like I say, I just wanted to go there because I've been waiting. And I'm like, okay, now we're getting, because you did hit on it with the blueprints with version control. And I thought that was obviously the right place to kind of stick this in. So thank you.
Yep, no problem. No problem. Good question. And okay, so one other thing that you can do with the cloud zones right here is I can also test to make sure that I set everything up properly. So when I go into the testing, I can say, did I actually do everything right to where it will go to the VMware Cloud on AWS if I choose those constraints. This is pretty helpful just to kind of make sure that you did all your mappings right, you did all your profiles right. Because if it came down here and it said, okay, you put in your env VMC tag, but I couldn't find an image here, then it just means that I didn't have a VMware Cloud on AWS image actually set up. So this is just a way to kind of feel a little confident that you've set everything up correctly and so forth. Okay. Now, the other thing that we do is we have this concept of projects. And projects basically allow us to have basically say what users are going to have access to this project. So you can have multiple projects with multiple different users in them or groups. And this allows you to carve out, again, even additional cloud zones. Because what you could do is for each project, you could assign certain cloud zones. So maybe you want to have a developer project where they just have access to maybe AWS and Azure. And then you have your production one where it's VMware Cloud and AWS, et cetera. So you can do that. And then within these projects, we can then also look at the overall cost of everything that we've deployed. And that comes from that pricing card. So you can say, hey, this project, is really expensive, where the other ones maybe not be, and things like that. And then obviously integrations that we've set up. So in here, we've set up our GitHub integration for our source control. We could have other integrations in here too, like Active Directory and some other things that we have, like info blocks and those sort of things for IPM. And then what you do is when you create those, what we call them cloud templates now, then that ties to a project. So let me jump into that real quick, and I'll show you what I've done here. So I've got a number of what we call cloud templates, right? And so some of these are in source control, some of them are not. We changed the name from blueprints, if you've been familiar with vRealize Automation, we changed it to cloud templates recently. And part of the reason why we did that is because our cloud templates do more now than just deploy VMs. We have actually Terraform integration to deploy Terraform services and stuff like that in here. And then also do custom resources. So over here on the left-hand side, these are called resource types. But now you can go in and create your own and things like that. So it's gone beyond just a little bit of, hey, I'm going to deploy a machine with maybe running a cloud config script and so forth. So one of the things that when you look at the designer, we have these capabilities to do a couple different things. One is this cloud agnostic. So you'll see this cloud agnostic section, then it goes into vSphere and then AWS and Azure and some of these other cloud native things. But we also have this concept of cloud agnostic. And basically what that means is we're not going to specify the cloud. So when I look at the machine's code, I'm basically just saying, hey, it's going to go where it needs to go based upon possibly inputs from the user, or it's going to be constrained based upon tags and things like that. But we're not going to specify the cloud because we want it to be able to go to any cloud out there, right? If I specifically drop a vSphere machine on the campus, it's only going to go to your vSphere environments. Now you can do cloud agnostic, I guess, across vSphere environments in that case, but it would never be able to go to an AWS environment. So cloud agnostic just means we're going to do things in a way where we're not specifying the cloud specifically. And you can see my constraints down here, right? It's if the input from the user is AWS, go to this environment. If the input is VMC, go to this environment. If they don't choose either one of these, go to vSphere. And so that diagram that you saw before will allow you to determine how it made the decision it made and why. Now, in this particular environment, I haven't added VMC in here yet on the tag. So what I'm going to do is just add VMC. And what that's going to do is just give me the ability to now have that as an option. So let's say, for instance, I was only going on-prem to vSphere and then AWS, and now I want to add VMC. I add that to my constraint tags. And then I just make sure that, the image mapping I'm using can go there, the flavor mapping can go there, et cetera. Now, what this application is, it's a front-end application. It's a shopping cart application. It's going to run some PHP and then a MySQL database and an Apache, and then we're going to load up a website here. And essentially, that'll be our application. So, and that's all going to be done in through the scripts here. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm just running a bunch of commands here through Cloud Config currently to do this, which is just one way that we can get an application installed onto the machine. The reason why we've chosen Cloud Config in the beginning is that cloud agnostic approach, because AWS instances will have that available, et cetera. Azure instances will have that available. And so it just gives you a more flexible approach to doing that kind of thing. The other thing that I can do as well is extensibility. So let's say that after the machine gets deployed, I want to do something in the environment. So we have these things called subscriptions or event broker subscriptions that can say, actually, after a compute allocation is done, or after post provision, or during the provisioning, or after deployment's done, do something, run a script. And essentially, in this particular case, what I can do, and this is actually what we would normally do in our public cloud demos, is if I deploy my application, I could do something like, hey, associate an IAM role with that machine. And what it'll do is after it provisions, it'll find the VM ID that got deployed, and then it'll associate a CloudWatch agent admin role that we use for some things, and associate that role with it inside of AWS. So this is just a Bodo3 script that we're running to do that. So those type of things can be done, or sophisticated naming scripts and things like that, or reaching out to CMDBs and a number of what we call extensibility actions around that. Okay, for a second time, let me jump over to our service broker, which is our catalog. And basically, our catalog system allows us to present a set of services and applications to users based upon role-based access policies, as well as then apply approval policies, lease times, and all that fun stuff you might expect from a catalog. In this one, I chose a catalog in one of my environments. I didn't have a lot of stuff, so it wouldn't be too confusing. But we can source control a number of things inside of here, like AWS CloudFormation templates, our cloud templates. We can actually put in what we have. We have a feature in this product called CodeStream that does application for pipelining. That integrates with all kinds of stuff in your environment. But you can even put pipelines in here or CI/CD pipelines. So if you wanted to create like this developer portal type of thing, you can do that. And then we can also bring in our orchestrator workflows for something we call XaaS, or anything as a service, to say, hey, you want to go out and do something in the environment, just run a script. And that could be, integrating with your Microsoft Active Directory. It could be integrating with another system. And you can present those XaaS services here, and gives you a lot of flexibility and power on what you can do from a catalog perspective.
Hey, Vincent.
Yeah.
Real quick, if you're talking about pipelines here. Does this also integrate with external, like GitHub Actions, GitLab CI, Travis, some of the others?
Yeah, well, from CodeStream, we do have like webhooks in the Git.
Okay, so just using webhooks.
Yeah,
okay.
You can use webhooks. So if someone makes a change, let's say, and this is a pretty common thing that we'll demo, it triggers a pipeline. Yeah, and then that pipeline could go out and do something like with Selenium or some other testing. So there's a number of what you'd basically do is you have pipelines and you have these tasks and you chunk it up. Okay. And those tasks could be like REST calls. You can have your own internal scripts. You can integrate with Kubernetes, Docker, Jenkins, and a number of other
all the normal things.
Yeah, all the kind of normal things. Yeah.
And one other comment, and then we'll move along because I know you're running short on time. And a couple slides back, or a couple things back, when you were showing modifying the code, that let's just say that code was pulled in from version control, and I'm going in and modifying it. Is it going to save those changes out? Is it going to highlight the diffs? Is it going to notify me that, hey, I made some changes and I need to commit those back to version control?
Yeah, so currently we don't have a sync back to Git.
Okay.
So that is being worked on. So the sync back isn't in there yet, but you can see the diffs.
Okay, good.
So
at least you can see that.
You can see the diffs. Yeah, in the designer, there's a diff section. You can look at it from a visual and a code perspective.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem. No question. Okay, so what I'll do is let me go in and just request the shopping cart application. So the shopping cart application is in here. Now, this is kind of a generic form I did. It's not real sophisticated, but you can go in and create custom forms, which you can get pretty fancy with how you want these forms to look and behave. You can do a lot of check a box, have another dropdown show up. You can do things like go out and things like where we have dynamic dropdowns that may go out and pull information from the CMDB through Orchestrator. So there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with custom forms, and you can really design it and make it look the way you want to. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, okay, here's my open cart, application deployment. And then I'm going to just basically choose my cloud, right? So here I basically am presenting the clouds just as they are, AWS, vSphere, and VMC for the demo purpose. But obviously you could put other titles here, right? This could be production, dev, test, gold, silver, bronze, whatever. And then you could pick what you need here. And then I'm just going to do one front end. And then we also have this daily price estimate thing. This is going to calculate what this would cost, what we estimate the cost would be based upon our pricing card. So based upon the number of machines that are going to get deployed in the environment, what do we think the cost is going to be? Now, again, this could be a filtering criteria for an approval. Okay, the cost. So if the cost goes over $5 a day or $10 a day, then hey, maybe we need to trigger an approval before this actually gets deployed, and those sort of things. So that's kind of what that price estimation does. And then let me do this real quick while I won't actually submit this for the sake of time because I already have one here. So kind of like the cooking show. So basically, yeah, there's our daily price estimate. We can look at some details on what each particular system would cost, basically. And then we hit submit, and then I'll just go ahead and hit submit and let it roll. So there it goes, starts my deployment. Now I already did one here because it does take a little bit of time for some of this like price and monitoring stuff to show up. But basically this was one I deployed, I think yesterday, or I don't know when I did this, maybe today. So yeah, I think it was yesterday. So we can see our systems here, our front end, our load gen, or MySQL. And this is the deployment. I can take day 2 actions on the deployment. And then I can also take day 2 actions on the machines over here. Now, these day 2 actions could be just out of the box. Most of these you're seeing are out of the box, but some of them could be custom day 2 actions. We do allow for that. So this move to folder is actually a custom one I created. And then what I could do is I could say, hey, I want to update the tags on one of these. So I could say, well, on my front end server, I forgot to tag it. And this will actually tag it here inside of vRealize Automation. But then it will also tag it in the cloud that it was in. So if it's in AWS's cloud, this tag will show up there. Also, if you tag the machine something in AWS or in vSphere, the tag will ultimately show up over here as well. And then what we can do is when we click on these machines, we can look at the history of what's done. So you can see I updated the tag on my MySQL machine earlier, and then you can see what I actually did. I changed it to key app and then MySQL. So you get a history of everything that's been done on this deployment. And then we can look at the overall price right now, currently our daily, weekly, monthly price that we looked at earlier from that pricing card. And then we do pull in a few inclusion metrics from vRealize Operations Manager if you have that integration set up. So I can look at each one of these real quick, just look at it, see what kind of, if there's any spike in CPU memory, and just get a glimpse from an automation standpoint. Now, you can't really drill in here or do much more. It's just a way to kind of get an idea of how this deployment may be behaving. We also have like this little health badge that comes from Operations Manager. So if you're in here kind of doing some day 2 work or iteratively updating, and all of a sudden you say, oh my gosh, I got a red, health is bad or something, you can take a look at it and then open up ops and try to troubleshoot it there. So that is generally the deployment as well afterwards. And then, of course, there's the application, right? If you double click on here and then we go into a browser, I could just kind of click on it there and then see that the app got deployed. All right, so that way I can connect to it right from here and just test it and then take my day 2 actions and things like that.